My name is Gillian Hunt and I'm the Research Officer for the Ulster Historical Foundation. The Ulster Historical Foundation is a not-for-profit educational charity which has been helping people find out more about their Irish and Scots-Irish ancestors since 1956. We had a census every 10 years in Ireland from 1821. Unfortunately, the vast majority of 19th century census returns were destroyed at the end of the 1800s and the early 1900s. That means that the earliest complete census we have for Ireland is 1901. So, to make up for this loss of this major source, we use a variety of other records to try and track our family through the 19th century in Ireland. One of the major sources we use as a census substitute are the Land and Property Valuation Records. Now, in some ways, this is a poor man's census substitute because unlike a census that would record everyone in the household on the night of the census, valuation records, due to their original function, only list the head of household, the occupier, the person paying the rent on the property or on the farm. But nonetheless, they're an important source for identifying your ancestor in a particular location at a particular time period, and then from there you can go on to look at other records available for that area. Now, there were a series of different valuations carried out throughout the 19th century. We're going to look at these in turn. And by using them all, you can hopefully track your ancestors through the different decades of the 19th century. Now, the tithe allotment books are the earliest valuation that we have. The tithe was a parish tax, and everyone renting land had to pay this towards the Church of Ireland. A tithe valuation was carried out by the government in the 1820s, 1830s, and it's this source that we can use to look for our ancestors. Now, it was organised by parish, and there was a tithe book for each parish, and then within the parish there were lists of townlands. Now, a group of townlands makes up a parish, and a townland is the smallest geographical unit we have in Ireland. They vary in size, some are less than an acre, some are several thousand acres, but on average they're about 200 or 300 acres. So an example of one, this is from the tithe allotment book for the parish of Ahadurg in County Down, and then this is the townland of Carrickadrumman, and we have the list of individuals renting land, the acreage of the land they were holding, and then how much they were going to be paying in that parish tax, in that tithe. Now, it was supposed to be a tax on land, so if your ancestors were just renting a house or they were living in an urban area like a town or village, often they won't be included in this valuation. However, we have found that some towns or villages were included because they were taxing people's backyards. And this is an example, the village of Portaferry in County Down. These individuals living in the village also appear in the tithe books. And while that was unfortunate for our ancestors who had to pay this tax, it is fortunate for us as genealogists because now we have lists of inhabitants in villages, some villages and towns from the 1820s and 1830s. Now, how can we access this tithe valuation? The National Archives of Ireland have digitised their tithe books and they have indexed them. So this is searchable database by name, and that's available on their website, titheallotmentbooks.nationalarchives.ie. And you get a list of results, and then when you click into the individual entries, it brings up a lovely scan of the page from the tithe book. A few years ago, the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland digitised their tithe books for the 6 counties of Northern Ireland, and they're available through PRONI's website, again a free resource, as is the National Archives. So this is their homepage. You go to Search Archives Online and then the Electronic Catalogue. And they are in the Electronic Catalogue under FIN/5/A. And then they're listed alphabetically by parish name. You can see the parish names here, and then each one has an individual reference number. And then in this column you can see the digital record. So when you click that, then you download the whole tithe book for a particular parish and look through it for the particular townland that you're interested in. And again, you can see the same format as we have already seen. The tithe books are really important for two reasons. First of all, they predate the famine. And the Great Famine in the late 1840s caused many people to emigrate. Many people unfortunately died in that period. But also within Ireland, there was a lot of internal migration. People moved to towns looking for employment, looking for work, maybe hoping to emigrate. So sometimes you can find your ancestors in later records, but you can't seem to find them in that area before the famine. If you can find your ancestors in a tithe book or your ancestral surname in a tithe book, then it is possible that they lived in that area for many, many years. I'm not saying there was no movement in Ireland before the famine, but there was less movement than there was from the mid-1800s onwards. The other reason the tithe books are so important is that the heaviest burden of the tax, the tithe, fell onto the poorest people. So you find them recorded in this book. And some of these people maybe don't appear in a lot of other paper records. Now, at the moment, Prony is working on an index to their tithe books, but as it stands at the moment, you need to know which parish you'd like to look through. So if you are looking for Northern Irish ancestors, there is an index to the tithe books available on rootsisland.ie. And Roots Island is a fantastic resource that contains over 20 million records, both civil and church records, as well as other kinds of land records. You can subscribe. It's a not-for-profit organisation. You can subscribe for a day, a month, 6 months or a year. And it's well worth, if you haven't already visited this website, it's well worth looking at. So they have index for many counties, including the 6 counties of Northern Ireland, for those tithe records. So you can search it, you get the list of names and the townland and parish, and then you could go to the Prony website and actually look at the originals through that. Now we're going to look at Griffiths valuation in just a minute, but be aware that the National Archives of Ireland have also been digitising their earlier valuation records that predate Griffiths, and these contain over 2 million names, and that's a particularly useful resource if perhaps your ancestors had left by the time that Griffiths valuation took place in the 1850s, 1860s. If you'd like to know more about those earlier valuation records, we would recommend this book by Francis McGee, former director of the National Archives and highly knowledgeable about these collection of records. And it's available for sale on our online bookstore, booksisland.org.uk. So Griffiths valuation is the most well known of all the valuation records of the 19th century in Ireland. Its formal title was the Primary or Tenement Valuation, but it's most well known as Griffiths valuation after the gentleman who created it, Sir Richard Griffiths, who was a geologist and a surveyor and was asked by the government to develop a system of valuation for Ireland of all land and property once the government realised that their previous attempts were falling short and were not up to the necessary standard for what they needed it for. His system that he created was so good that it was used in Ireland well into the 20th century. Now, just bear in mind that the valuation was completed at different dates for each county as they moved round the island of Ireland. And that's important because the Griffiths valuation lists the head of household, in most cases the occupier, and who the occupier was in the early 1850s in your family, who the head of household was in your family in the early 1850s could be quite different to who the head of family was by the mid-1860s. So just keep an eye on the date the Griffiths valuation took place in the county you're interested in. Now, the reason this valuation was created was to decide how much tax each occupier of property and land should be paying, and that tax led to the upkeep, for example, of the local workhouse. So at the time, printed volumes of these valuations were created, over 300 volumes, so that local people could look at them and see how much their land and property had been valued at. and there was an appeal system if they felt it had been overvalued and they were therefore being asked to pay too much tax. It's these printed books we're most familiar with. Those are the ones that are available online. So I'm just going to take you through these in case you haven't looked at them before. So they're organised originally by barony and then by poor law union, then by parish and then by townland. You can see this is the townland of Drummadreen in County Londonderry. So the numbers in this first column relate to individual plots of land within the townland, and then the uppercase letters relate to two plots of land occupied by the same person, and that may be two plots of land that weren't beside each other in the townland, or it could be that the valuer has actually divided the farm up because one was a higher quality of land than the other section, and he's showing that in the valuation. And then the lowercase letters here are individual build houses on a farm. Then we have the occupier. Most of our ancestors will be found in this column. So they're renting a house or a farm. And then the immediate leaseor. So this is the person from whom the individual in this column is renting from. We have a description of the tenement: house, offices and land. In this case, offices being outbuildings, not offices as we would think about them today. And this gentleman, John King, is renting almost 60 acres of land from the Marquis of Waterford. So in this case, we can see John King is the tenant, the Marquis of Waterford is the landlord. And Griffiths can be useful even for those of you whose ancestors had emigrated before this time, because looking at this column in the area where your family came from, you can see in most cases you can identify easily who the major landowner of the area was. You can see running your eye down this column, it is the Marquis of Waterford. So should you wish to then look for landed estate papers, which can date from the 1700s, even the 1600s, looking for your ancestors, this is a good way to identify which landed estate collection you need. And I have a separate session on landed estate papers that you may want to watch later on. But we also have individuals in this column who are renting a house from the tenant farmer. So these individuals are renting a house from John King. So he doesn't own this land himself, he's a tenant, but he's subletting these houses to these individuals. And then if we look at plot number 7 down here, Joseph Hunter is renting a farm from the Marquis of Waterford. And like I say, for most of us, it's those printed volumes that we can access most easily online. But if you can, it's always worth looking at the original valuers' notebooks, because sometimes they can contain a bit more information. Often it will be exactly the same as the printed volume, but just occasionally there may be something else. Now, if you're looking in the Republic of Ireland, those earlier notebooks have begun to be digitised by the National Archives. For Northern Ireland, those valuation notebooks are available in Prony. So if we look at this manuscript book, the original Griffiths valuation took place in this area in 1856. And we can see the black ink of the original valuation. But before it went to print, the valuer actually revisited and updated the notebook. And you can see he's marked his changes in blue ink before it went to print in 1858. And the printed volume shows the most recent information, so shows there Joseph Hunter as the tenant. But we can see in the original book that actually in 1856 Samuel Long was a tenant, and he was subletting 2 houses on his farm to Arthur Begley and to John Brawley. Those 3 men were not on the farm any longer when the valuer returned in 1858, so they do not appear in the printed volume. And if one of those men was your ancestor, you wouldn't find him in the printed copy of Griffiths, but he does actually appear in the original book. So like I say, where possible, and this is true of all records, if you can, look yourself at the original scan if it's been digitised, or if you're able to visit the archives or commission someone to visit the archives on your behalf, it is always worth checking the original wherever possible. Now you can see from these examples that the valuations, they don't contain usually any genealogical information, but on occasion they may do, and that's particularly true in Griffiths if If there were a number of individuals in a townland of the same name, obviously there was a smaller pool of first names that we used at that time, and some surnames are particularly common in particular areas. So this townland, for example, we have lots of O'Kanes and lots of Mullins, so the valuer needed to differentiate between individuals of the same name. And he did that by putting an extra word in brackets after the name. Sometimes he used occupation or physical description, but sometimes he used the old Gaelic system of putting the father's name in brackets. And we can see this here. There were 3 Patrick Mullins in the townland. One was son of Hamish, one was son of Denny, and one was son of Mickey. So there is some genealogical information occasionally found in Griffiths valuation. Now, where can we access this? It is available on Ancestry and on Find My Past, but I love askaboutisland.ie. It's a free resource. The website itself is run by Libraries Ireland, and there is a wealth of information on the history and culture of Ireland, which is worth exploring. But in this session, we're going to just look at the Griffiths valuation application. You can search by surname, by first name. You can narrow it down by county or by parish. You can also search sideways by place name if you know the townland that they were living in. And then you get a list of results. Now you can see I was searching for Pritchard in this case. You see some names that are not Pritchard. The website pulls the surname from both that first column of occupier and the second column of leaseor. So these individuals were renting houses from a Pritchard. We have the county, the parish, then we have the details. If you click on that, you get a pop-up box which shows more detail of the geographical area. And then if we go to the original page, that brings up a nice scan of the printed volume that we've already looked at. And then if we look at the map view, this is a fantastic resource from this website. They have scanned the accompanying valuation maps for the whole island of Ireland. And you can see this thick red line is the outline of the townland. We see the townland name here and the acreage of land. And there are lots of records that contain the name of the townland that you will find in your family history research, but Griffiths valuation is the only source that covers the whole island of Ireland and shows you not just the townland your family lived in, but the specific farm, the specific area in the townland. And that's what these thinner red lines are with the numbers in them. Those are individual farms, and the numbers relate to that first column that I showed you. So you can really drill down and pinpoint exactly where your family were living if they were farming land. Now you see the individual letters A and B there, A, B and C, D and number 7. Those were the individual houses that were shown on the printed volume in the first column. Now not every valuer marked the houses on the map, but many of them did. So even if your ancestor was just renting a house in the countryside, it may be that you can still identify the exact location. And then if we go up to the scroll bar, which is just on the top right, it defaults to historic map, but if you move it to modern map and then click on satellite on the top left, it brings up this lovely image of Google Earth. And you can see, I always find it amazing that 160 years later, a lot of the field boundaries are exactly the same, not much has changed, and we can still see buildings in the exact location as some of those houses were marked on Griffiths. We can't tell from Google whether that's a modern building or an original farmhouse. That's when you have to book a trip to Ireland and go on an adventure. And if we go back to the scroll bar and move it to the middle, we can overlay the two maps and you can really see exactly where your ancestors were residing. And then just to finish off, we have the valuation revision books, so-called in Northern Ireland. They're called cancelled books. In the Republic, they're the same source. So the valuers revisited the townland every few years and updated the information, any changes in occupancy, any changes in the valuation of the land and property. Now for Northern Ireland, these have been digitised, a joint project between the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and Prony. And you can search by place name, townland or street there. You get a list of results. Each book roughly covers 10 years. The valuer, once it got too busy with too many changes, the valuer would start a new book and move the most updated information into it. Then the content, the index image will show you the content, showing you the page number that you're interested in. Then you can jump forward 10 pages or click through individual pages. And then you have this lovely scan. And you can see that every time the valuer visited the townland, he updated the information using a differently coloured ink. And that's what makes them such a wonderful resource. So Daniel's name was scored out and his wife's name was put in in pink ink, and then over here we have 76, so that change happened in 1876. Now it doesn't mean Daniel necessarily died in that year. That's the year the valuer visited. He could have died in the previous year, sometime between the previous valuation and this one. So it's really helpful for helping you identify possible years of immigration, possible years of death. Now, these books can look quite busy, sometimes quite overwhelming, but they're laid out exactly the same way as Griffith's valuation. And remember that in most cases, you're interested maybe just in one entry on a page for you to interpret. You don't need to interpret every single change on a particular page within this. For the Republic of Ireland, these have been digitised by the Valuation Office in Dublin. They're working on the final counties to be digitised. These are not online. They've been digitised for preservation reasons. So you have to visit the Valuation Office yourself in person, or for a fee, the staff will copy pages for you. And I put the website just down there at the bottom. So hopefully that's given you a brief overview of the usefulness of the valuation records for the 19th century as a census substitute, and you can really learn more about how your family were living at the time if they were renting a farm, the size of farm, the quality of land in the farm. We would be delighted to help you find out more about your ancestors, so please do visit our website or contact us using our email. And I'd like to thank you for listening to this presentation.